thank everybody for joining us today. APADC. I wanted to just kind of start. If you're not familiar with APA, we're a trade organization. Hopefully, you are familiar with us, that you've shown up. But we're a trade organization, um, you know, created by photographers for photographers. We've got some really great events coming up locally. I want to mention we've got on the 14th. We've got financial planning for artists event coming up. Then on the 22nd, we're going to have another event similar to this one with Amy Scott, who's the founder of Queer the Lens. And then a little later in the month, I think we're going to be having a happy hour as part of the launch for our grant that we're doing for an LGBTQ photographer grant, and rolling that out this month during Pride Month. So hope you can all join us for that. And yeah, and then again, I want to mention the we've got the code. If you're not a member or you want to sign up for APA, we've got a number of different membership levels, and a lot of great reasons to be a member as well. And there's a discount code for signing up. It's Welcome Jen with two N's, and that's 20% off new membership. And Caroline put that into the chat there if you want to make note of that. And then also we've got the APA Awards that are going on right now. It's open for entries. I think for a couple more weeks, entries are accepted, and it's a really great way to get your work out there in front of creatives. And winning is there's a first, second, third, and a best of show on a number of different categories that you can enter in. And having won a couple times myself, I can tell you it's resulted in some pretty big jobs for me, and all the stuff that comes along with winning is pretty great. So highly recommend putting your best work out there for that. And yeah, and I'm sorry, and I'm Mike Morgan. I'm the chair of the board of directors for our local DC chapter. So yeah, and thank you everybody for coming. And so I don't know if our guest really needs an introduction necessarily, but we're joined by Peter Grill today. Peter was a longtime assistant in the DC area who worked with just about everybody here locally, and from pretty much everywhere else, I would say, and has now transitioned out to Portland, Oregon, and into doing more of his own shooting, but also still with a foot in the digital tech world, and assisting, and has interesting ways that he's organized his business around that. So be really great to hear all about that. So I think without further ado, Peter, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thanks everyone for hopping on. I see a lot of familiar names in the list. But hopefully it's not too repetitive for the folks that I know and kind of already know what I'm about. But I'm a freelance photographer, and I also am owner-operator of Format Capture, which is a small little digital capture and lighting house. So we do capture packages and G&E and stuff like that, stills focused for all sorts of shoots. And this will be my 8th year freelancing. So I've been doing this for just over 7 years, and I've been freelance the whole time. Since graduating, no typical 9-to-5, no like real job. So I've only known the freelance life. And so that's kind of what I was going to talk about, is just like making a career out of this and being a contractor in the industry, trying to develop as a professional, how to maintain client base, how to get started as like a photo assistant, working on your portfolio, and kind of just how to how I've kind of just maintained a small business and tried to just run a successful small business. And so when I first started, I didn't really know what commercial photography was. And I feel like, you talk to a lot of people and it's like they read some old Nat Geo and they look at the photos and it's like, oh, that's what a photographer does. Or that's kind of their impression of that looks cool. I want to travel, or I want to go to this place. And that's what I thought, just look at these magazines, like, oh, that's cool. And when you find out like, oh, this is like a career path, or I can like study this, but still didn't really know like what commercial photography looked like, what is the day in the life as a photographer, or even getting there, what's life on set like. And so photo assisting was a great way to get into that world, see what it's about, get exposed to lots of different genres, shoots, locations, different styles, and just absorb all of that, especially in the beginning. I think that's a great way just to like kind of figure things out, because not really knowing what it looks like, not really knowing like what all the careers are, not even really knowing like there's so many positions you can have on set, right? I have friends who it all started from that, looking at those Nat Geos and wanting to be the photographer, but maybe you go to school, or maybe you get on set and it's more like, oh, actually I want to be in art department, or I like working with my hands, I'm going to be lighting, or maybe you were first attracted to stills, but then you're on some motion shoots and it's like, oh, motion's really cool, maybe I want to be a DP. Or maybe you're more detail oriented and you want to be a producer or something. So just like figuring it out and getting exposed to all those different positions, I think is really useful in the beginning. PAing or being a photo assistant right off the get-go is like how you're gonna just get exposed to all that information and network and talk to people and figure out like the different roles and kind of where you want to go or where you want to aim for. And part of that is also showing you like maybe what you don't want to do. You'll work with lots of different photographers, lots of different genres. And I know I've been on architecture shoots, fitness shoots, product, all sorts of stuff. And yeah, you can put yourself in different shoes of like, oh, like this is fun. Like I want to shoot this job, or like, oh, I've been in a studio all week. I need some sunshine. Like maybe product isn't for me, or vice versa. And so, getting in on the ground as a photo assistant and getting exposed to all those things is totally like a great way to just kind of show you the options out there. When I graduated, so I did go to photo school, and when I graduated, I was like, I wanted to do fashion, studio fashion. I like never worked on location. I spent all my time renting the school studio. But then like after working for a little bit, I completely pivoted. I like working on location, the variety of that. And so like, you kind of don't know, like, even if you're psyched on something early, like it can totally change. And kind of just getting, you don't necessarily know what those options are until you're on those sets and seeing what it's like of the different genres and stuff. And so, so photo assisting is that great entry into just seeing what's out there. It's also just going to be like a, low barrier, your first position, it's a paycheck, like it's a job. So, you can try and jump into just shooting. You hear a lot of people starting with like, oh, I shot weddings on the weekend or whatever, but building shooting clients early from scratch is going to be really hard. So it's maybe a little bit more realistic to start with photo assisting, see what's out there, and it's just it's a paycheck, right? But then besides that, and I'm going to keep saying this the rest of the talk, but like all the skills you learn on set, assisting or otherwise, you're going to carry that to every other shoot you're on, you know, whether or any other department you work on. It's all just going to add up. You know, just that general set time is going to add up and help you build like your set etiquette. You know, your presence on set, how you interact with clients, how you see other people interact, you know, with different departments. So just that time on set, that experience on set is just going to add up. You can carry that to your own photography or wherever you go in the industry. But yeah, being an assistant early on, you're going to build all those skills from, you know, the hard technical skills like lighting and camera operation, and not just like learning the gear and learning like, oh, this is how you light a portrait, but in different scenarios. So you're going to be on set, and, you know, how you light something with pre-light is going to look totally different than how you light a shot that the agency added. It's extra, you know, you're already into overtime. You got to get it done super fast, or talent has a hard out and you got to get something, you know, your plan B. That's going to look different than having a full pre-light. Or, you know, lighting something in a big studio is going to look different than lighting the same shot, but you're in a tiny little conference room. You know, your access to equipment, having tons of gear is going to look different lighting the same shot than having, you know, maybe you only have natural light. So being on set, seeing how different photographers are going to operate and different first assistants are going to operate from like a lighting technical perspective is going to be super valuable. Seeing all those different ways and standards. The equipment, you know, you see the patterns, you kind of learn what the essential gear is, the standardized gear. You know, you're going to be able to help build equipment lists and, you know, do the prep work for planning shoots. But also just, you know, you work with 10 different photographers, you're going to see 10 different tripods, and you can, you know, you can buy once, cry once. Like, it's going to save you a lot of time and money if you're making informed decisions about the gear. You know, we're basically tradesmen, we're using the tools, and so to be able to be exposed to all the different types of equipment early, and, you know, especially early in your career when you're investing in like, oh, I want to buy my first camera, or knowing like, you know, maybe you rent certain things, but maybe you buy you know, a good tripod in the beginning, or whatever gear. You're going to be exposed to lots of different, you know, I've seen all sorts of tripod heads. I know the best ones for architecture or the best ones for lifestyle. And so those little things that you can pick up, you know, that translates into your own photography or your own business. You know, making those informed decisions about the tools that you're going to use. Going back to that set time, you know, photo assisting is just a great way to get that experience, just the time on set. Because that's a hard thing to necessarily teach. You're not going to get that in photo school. It's kind of just from experience. And especially, you know, you're starting out, even if you are starting out shooting, you're shooting a bunch of editorial stuff, like the realistic amount of shooting days that a working photographer has like isn't super high. Whereas if you're assisting on lots of stuff, you're probably going to be able to get more set time faster, just to get all those experiences and to glean all that information. As, you know, a working crew member, I think I've got close to 600 jobs now, and like over 1,000 days, you know, on photo shoots. And hopefully you learn from a little something on as much of those as you can. So that's kind of my spiel on like, oh, like the pros of, besides just being a job, like getting in and photo assisting is just a great way to pick up all this extra information, and carry it for the rest of your hopefully long career in the industry. But so how I did it, I did go to photo school. And if, you know, my bachelor's degree in photography was my undergrad, photo assisting, especially those first couple of years, was my graduate program, basically. And I kind of knew as a senior that like photo assisting was like the path or an option to take as far as like, how do you become a professional photographer? So I was kind of familiar with it. I assisted a couple professors on shoots. I had assisted a couple like friends of professors. I remember one of my first commercial jobs, my studio product teacher let me and another classmate essentially skip to go assist. So getting that early experience of just like, okay, like this, I think this is like, this is a job, this works, you know, this is a paycheck. I think I can do this. This is what I'm going to try and do. You know, once I graduate, it's just try to get in with photographers and assist and build from there. And so, you know, right out of, I kind of knew what it was, but I had no contacts. And I started in DC, and it was just cold emails, cold calling. I went to every APA meeting I could, every ASMP meeting I could, all the happy hours, whatever local, whatever local, you know, photography. DC had a couple like DC Exposed and some other local groups, you know, photo competitions. Just go to all that stuff, try and network with people. And for me, at least, I was honest about like, oh, I'm at these photographer meetings. I'm trying to assist. You know, I'm not really shooting a bunch. You know, I just graduated school. And the same with cold emailing people. I was really short and to the point of just, you know, look, here are my skills. Here's who I've worked with. You know, I'd look at everyone's portfolios. I'd make a little comment on, oh, I really like this project. It'd be great to work with you. And that was, you know, really short. I'll get some emails from people and it'll be like full on pages of resumes, you know, huge descriptions, and it can get you get a little bogged down with all of that. But I feel like I got a really good response to just being concise, being honest about your skill set, and just being humble, you know, like, oh, you know, I'm down to, you need to, you know, repaint the cyc walls, go get coffee, whatever, like, just want to get on set, get that set time. And when commercial photographers are hiring an assistant and they're looking for a professional assistant, you know, they're not trying, there is no mentor relationship. It's hiring you to come on set, do a job. But when you're looking at local photographers or like your own market, you know, the local shooters need first. They need a first assistant kind of relationship. And they're going to go through, they might have a long-term one, but they're going to go through several. You know, the good photographers will try and push them to you know, eventually go shoot their own stuff. But as opposed to like a traveling photographer who just needs to hire a pro, get the job done and wrap, the local shooters, you know, because they need a local, they can't fly someone in for every little job. You know, they need a good local first. And if they can't find one, you know, they can groom one, they can teach one, get them familiar with their kit, with their lighting style. And so I got kind of lucky timing wise. I met up with a photographer who was kind of between firsts. He knew I was fresh, but we could work on some low stakes projects, especially personal projects, just to kind of get up to speed. And so one thing about the personal project things, like, you never stop testing. No matter what you shoot, you never stop working on your portfolio. And so, and a lot of times, you know, that's coming out of your own pocket for a test shoot. And so to have like, you know, there's no client, you can be a little bit more casual, a little bit more chill, and you have time on those types of shoots to, you know, bring someone up to speed or teach them, or every little lighting thing, like, oh, we're doing this way because of this, or, you know, like, oh, I see you know, you put that C-stand like this, but actually this is the proper way to do it. You can take those breaks and those pauses on a lower stakes, local, small, maybe it's a test shoot, maybe it's just a small editorial thing. But with those local photographers, you can, have those interactions. Whereas if you're just hired as a pro, like, they're not going to teach you anything. You're not supposed to, you're not expected to, need to be taught anything. So I was lucky in the beginning that I got connected with a local shooter, and he needed a first for, he was kind of in between firsts. And the first 6 months, we mostly just worked on his portfolio. I was getting paid. It wasn't like unpaid internship, but it was out of pocket. It might be a little bit lower rate, but you're gonna have that exchange of information. And so that was, especially in the beginning, super important, I think, as far as just like getting up to speed, and also seeing how a professional photographer tests, like seeing how they work on their book, which you're going to do, which they're going to do the rest of their career. That was, great information to have and get up, behind the scenes on. And I think most of the DC APA folks know that photographer was Rob Cherie. One of the first projects we worked on, after a few local things, he was working on this new big test that he wanted to produce, and he basically wanted me to go location scout, figure out, the best angles and access points and blah, blah, blah. And he wanted kind of, some mountainous Blue Ridge kind of vibes. I was like, oh, well, I went to school in North Carolina. Like, I know potential talent, I know potential locations, like, why don't we go shoot down there? And so I went ahead of time, maybe like a week or so, scouted, casted, you're learning how to build schedules. We basically casted just a bunch of, my friends from school or professors' friends. And we shot some of this personal work in the span of just a couple of days. Like, we were doing, we'd shoot sunrise every day, sunset every day, some stuff in between. And we just kind of hammered out a bunch of different scenarios, and portraits and all sorts of stuff. And that was a great first, full, it wasn't, a commercial job with high pressure. It was just, it was just for his book, but I got to, get in on planning, casting, location scouting. We had a wardrobe artist, kind of all those pieces in a low stakes environment, in an environment where I, could learn and, grow and make some mistakes and stuff like that. Where's that go? And so those kind of portfolio building, those low stakes things that you can hopefully do with a local photographer, are just such a great way to get started and, kind of get up to speed to assist, your one-offs, people coming into town, and just needing a pro assistant. And for so even though these were natural light kind of stuff, we would bring a ton of gear. And that goes back to getting your hands on, learning the lighting and the equipment. Because on these low pressure jobs, it's, oh, here's what I keep in this case. Here's what's in this case. Here's how I like my camera bag organized. And learning someone's kit quickly, someone who you hopefully will want to work with again, learning their kit as fast as possible is the number one way to, getting higher up on their list of trying to be a first assistant. And so for jobs, even these low-key shoots, we'd bring all this gear, and he would say, if we don't bring it, we'll need it. And if we bring it, we probably won't use it. but we got to be hands-on and like on downtime, go through it all, you know, practice setting up scrim gyms and lighting and all that stuff. And then our first commercial job after, you know, a little bit of those low pressure test shoots, you know, I got to be thrown into like an actual commercial shoot. And so my first big one out of school was up in Baltimore, which we did not work as locals. We were doing early call times. We got put up in Baltimore. I think it was like just a 3-day shoot or something with a little bit of prep on each end. And Rob brought in his longtime first assistant, Joe Graziano, who I think might be in here. And working even just those two or three shoot days, I learned so much. Working with like an experienced first like that was just like a semester crammed into a week of just commercial assisting, dealing. You know, I had been hands-on with all this gear in school and stuff, but actually dealing with it on set and on a schedule, with, you know, not in a controlled studio. You're out on location. I think for this shoot, we were in hospitals, we were on the streets, we were all over the place. And so all of that, it's just more challenging, and you have to, it's just kind of a different vibe. But working with an experienced first, and that was like that first time, like, oh, this guy really has his shit dialed. But every time I'd work with like a really good first assistant coming in from New York or LA, like those were some of the most valuable days as a photo assistant, working with just super, I mean, people who had been on thousands of shoots, lit thousands of jobs. Like you're talking with, you know, those so much more experience and so much more time on set, going back to those set days, like than, you know, most working photographers, those really experienced first. So, and still to, you know, now if some big photographers coming in, you know, it's always a pleasure and exciting to work with a first who's, you know, made a very long career out of, you know, they're not the photographer, they're not the tech, they're just, this is their world. And yeah, those days have just been some of the best as far as getting information. So this was that commercial job. You know, it was like kind of, you know, real people. I think this was for kind of, you know, financial job. And you can see, you know, we're flying big octabanks and we're flying 12 buys and 20 buys, and, you know, getting experience with that stuff. This safety side of things was huge, especially early on, to have that instilled in you. Like, if you're on set all the time, like there's going to be accidents eventually. So safety is such a huge part of just mitigating that risk for all your shoots going forward, working with, you know, not rushing through things, because you're going to be on locations with VIPs, dealing with wind up on rooftops and balconies, and, you know, heavy equipment. So working with experienced people who take it seriously, and kind of respect some of the challenges and the dangers involved is really valuable. And, you know, talking about bringing this stuff to your own stuff, like if you're on a shoot and you're you know, the photographer, and you've never flown a 12 by, like, you know, you don't want to be learning on the job. You don't want to be making the mistakes with something like that, you know, in a windy situation. So getting some of that stuff out of the way and learning about it early was pretty great. So going back to that commercial shoot, it was long days, but like it was a great client. You know, this was probably like the first job that had a motorhome and, you know, full wardrobe and makeup artists and all this stuff. So I was like, oh, this is awesome. And it was one of my first jobs. It was like, oh, they're all going to be like this. You know, we're going to these great wrap dinners and everything. We're being put up in hotels. for basically a local job. And I was a little jaded and quickly learned that they were not all like that. And there's a lot of sludge in between the big commercial shoots. But kept working with Rob on commercial stuff, kept working with him on portfolio testing. This is from another big portfolio test. We went down to Arkansas to shoot, to cover these hunters. And I was second shooting and helping, with coordinating and, editing, data management and stuff. And second shooting that job, I got some great images out of it that are still in my portfolio now, and honestly are like the most like referenced shots I get when I'm like bidding on something, or I've directly had art directors reference these photos of like, oh yeah, we want you to do something like this, or oh yeah, we loved this project and because of that we think you're a great fit for this other thing. And so that's just like seeing, getting that, oh, photographer wants this in his portfolio, he's identified this industry or this sector or this agency or whatever, I want to shoot that, let's plan it out, when's the best time, who are we going to do it with, and then taking that and going right into from that, completing that project and having it pay off on a commercial. Sometimes it's hard to connect the dots as far as like your marketing or your personal your portfolio, but to be able to be like, that shot got me that job was pretty great, as far as like, oh yeah, so this is why we're doing all these portfolio tests, and this is why we're planning this way, and just reinforcing how to test and how to build your book. And so this shoot years later, more or less got me this job, shooting with Microsoft and the US Army to cover some of their HoloLens technology. They have like my hunter portraits in the mood board, and like when you have your shots in the mood board, that's when like, okay, yeah, like I got this shit. And just being able to be like, so literally like, okay, this project got me this, what's the next project that we're gonna build, what's the next test shoot that hopefully will lead to another job. And then so that's what I was working with Rob, and that just snowballed into lots of other shooters, and once you build those skills up, and you can kind of start marketing yourself as a pro assistant, and that was something I kind of the way I looked at my business or my services. It's easy to be like, oh, you're just you want to shoot, so you gotta work on some test shoots, work on the portfolio. But from like kind of a revenue perspective, it was, okay, I'm making my money photo assisting, what, if that's my job, if that's my business, what else is gonna, like, what's the next logical step, what's gonna increase revenue, or do I just need more days, or do I need higher rates? Well, if I want higher rates, I have to up my skills, or however. Oops, get a little dark there. And so I was kind of just focused on getting more photographers basically in my roster or my client base. I was maybe I became one person's first assistant. Well, I want to be two photographers' first assistant, or I want to be 3 or 4 or whatever. So I kind of just kept building from that perspective of, this is my job, how can I just like increase the scope of it. And being freelance full time, like, you make your own schedule, but you really, at the end of the day, you always have to be available, which no family vacations, no traveling. It took a long time to be just financially and like mentally, you know, it's hard to turn down work. So it took a while, but, you know, eventually I was, you know, taking time and putting money into some of my own tests. So this was like one of my first test shoots, you know, where I like spent money on a hotel, and traveled, and, you know, gave all the models $50 or whatever, which definitely, you know, it's a little scary in the beginning to be like, you know, dropping hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars on, out of pocket. But it was one of my first ones. Got a bunch of, and, you know, directly from those lessons working with Rob and building, assisting him on his own portfolio shoots, took that to, okay, like, what do I want? You know, what shots do I want in my book? Where can I shoot that? Who can I, you know, work with? And just produced a little 3-day, you know, you're shooting, you know, sunrise to sundown every day. And just, yeah, building out a little bit of my own portfolio stuff. And then basically after this, it's just a bunch of random behind the scenes. It doesn't really translate necessarily to what I'm talking about. But, you know, thinking about it as a business, even though it's just photo assisting, you know, I was, you know, expanding my network, getting more photographers as clients and producers as clients. And one of the things that I was doing was, you know, picking up gear before shoots. Rental houses are open 9 to 5. Photo shoots generally start before 9. And they generally end after 5. So you're generally, you know, you're doing gear orders the day before, the day after. And as an early assistant, you know, you're getting some half rate or something, which doesn't really exist anymore. But yeah, I would get like a half rate to go return some orders or whatever. And going back to, like, I'm seeing the equipment that's used, I'm seeing the equipment that's rented, I'm seeing the equipment that certain people buy, and, you know, oh, this photographer, yeah, they have like a 4-light kit, but it's Dynalight, and this photographer has a 4-light kit, but it's Alien Bees, and this photographer has this, and oh, but everyone's renting Profoto B1s. And I was doing those gear returns. I would see the lists. I knew what kind of the common orders were. And so that was kind of one of the next things was buying the common rental items and just being like, oh, you know, I've got some of that in my truck, or, you know, I have a few of these things. So, you know, I had those ideas, but I saved up for months and months until I could invest in the first strobes I got were, I got a pair of, I think I probably got like the Location Profoto B1 kit. And that just snowballed. And it's been growing since then. And yeah, it was just that kind of next step of like, oh, okay, well, this will get my day rates a little bit higher. And, you know, what's the next thing that can bump it up a little bit? And so I also got involved with digital teching, which, going back to school, like, college was a great, you know, you got hands-on with a lot of gear. And so it was a great technical intro to like all these different systems. And so I was familiar with tethering to Capture One or to Lightroom. Like, we had played around. I think we tethered like a Hasselblad H4D, or maybe it was a 3D to focus. And so I was familiar with digital teching, or tethering as a concept. I was not familiar with digital teching. But eventually someone asked, and it was kind of like, oh, I might be able to help out, or, you know, here's kind of what I know about it. Because you know, going back, you always want to be honest with your skill set. But I would also be on shoots where, let's say it's corporate headshots. You set up, you light everything, but then we're just tethering, so you're kind of just seeing the images pop in. Even just as an assistant, like, oh, I think this one's sharp, or oh, the strobes didn't fire on that one. You kind of start getting the gist of, maybe what a digital tech does. So those first strobes, and then kind of getting into the digital teching of like, oh, you have a computer, you rent that kind of stuff, as far as like, how do I get my day rate? How do I just get my services higher? And obviously, being a photographer, your day rate's a lot higher, but just at the time, it was like, I didn't have any photo clients. I didn't own a camera. It was just those incremental logical steps of like, oh, well, if I run a B1 on every job, I'm making an extra, $70 or whatever. And so that just started to grow. I think at first I was keeping like C-stands under my bed. But eventually, it just expanded and expanded to grip and strobe. And DC was kind of a good little market for me, where the rental houses weren't, like I said, the hours are off. So like you have to pay an assistant anyways to go get the stuff the day before or return it the day after. So the convenience thing and the extra fees for delivery wasn't working for people. And also just kind of being a small market, like the gear houses didn't have a huge selection anyways. So that kind of let me, seeing what the common orders were, let me kind of build that up and kind of figure out what I wanted to provide. And once I was, assisting a lot and doing the, once I was really feeling solid as a professional assistant, I had my local clients, but I also had a lot of people coming down from out of town, specifically photographers coming down on the train from New York. And so that became my like ideal client, where they would bring, their think tank roller bag with their cameras, and that was it. And I basically built up like basically a photographer's kit, what a local might have, and more so as far as lighting and grip for a variety of jobs. And that was, for a while, that was my like bread and butter, was someone coming down with a camera bag and just being like, all right, I've got everything. What are we gonna light and shoot today? And in the back of my head, that whole time, from the very first strobe, whether I made a profit or whether I was just subsidizing it, I was building my own photographer's kit. So DC was a culture, because the rental houses weren't great, was a culture of photographers owning, a lot of their gear. So it's just like, I was building up that stuff for myself, and I happened to turn a profit on it, and like, oh, well, maybe I'll buy more stuff and turn a profit on that and buy more stuff. But that's where that kind of initial idea was. I didn't want to do those half-day rental returns when I could just be renting the gear, and I wanted gear for myself, for my own test shoots, and just to, you can't really bill for rental stuff on an editorial job. So building up that selection of gear for myself, and really figuring out like that clientele base of like, oh, these photographers who are coming down on the train, they don't want to bring anything with them, but I can just, I've got my kit, and I can work it that way. And with digital teching, not, at least in DC, digital techs were only on like the big ad jobs. They weren't on anything editorial. They weren't on a lot of the smaller stuff. Come here. And so having a little bit of grip, a little bit of strobe in that market, that stuff would go out on small editorial jobs. The photographer doesn't own strobes. Oh, their assistant can come with them. That's great. So I was able to get those higher rates even on the small gigs. Whereas, if I was only digital teching, I just wouldn't have worked. People wouldn't have necessarily, at that point in time in DC and just in the industry kind of in general, the digital teching stuff seemed new and only on those ad jobs. Whereas for any little portrait, I could rent a couple B1s and, you know, a couple C stands and get those rates up. And that grew. You can see in this one, like, there's a lot of stuff in my apartment now, renting, you know, 12 by 12s and scrims and, you know, different modifiers, and going back to, you know, working with lots of different photographers. Like, oh, I know what stands I want. I know the best stands. Oh, I know I want that 12 by Avenger all-in-one folding thing. Or, oh, I like square speed rail instead of circular speed rail, or whatever. Like, you knowing the right tools for the job, and building out that, you know, making those informed decisions on kit, you know, came from the assisting experience, and helped me, you know, have a somewhat concise stuff. I'm not having to replace shitty cheap stands that you buy and then you have to replace, and then you have to replace, and, like, you know, getting the good stuff the first time will save you a lot of headache. Like I said, this is just a bunch of random behind the scenes from, like, iPhones, so bear with the random imagery. So, like, going from digital tech, you know, seeing, you know, Seaport cases, and to the now ubiquitous digi plates, and making choices on that kind of gear. And so, kind of going, like, thinking about assisting as a business, I made an assisting website pretty early on. You know, me and all these other alumni, from all my classmates, you know, our original, like, photography websites, so many of them would be, oh, I'm a photographer, but I also photo assist or produce, or I can be your PA too, or I could be your digital tech. And it's just like, not necessarily, like, as soon as you start mentioning those other things, whoever's reading the site is like, oh, so they're not, like, totally a pro photographer. And so I separated them. I made a photo assisting site really early, because one of the things I was finding was photographers would get my name from, like, an APA database or APA ASMP or Wonderful Machine. You know, I'd be on all these crew databases, but then before they'd reach out to me, they would find a photographer in the market, email them, and be like, hey, is this what do you know about this Peter guy? And before getting in touch with me, before hiring me for the job. And I knew that because I was buddies with some local photographers who'd be like, hey, such and such is emailing me asking about you. And I wanted to skip that step. So I made the website so I could put testimonials on. That was like that was the first thing I wanted to do. It was just like, hey, I'm a professional assistant. Here's who I've worked with. You know, here's what they have to say. And so at first it was like, you know, people like Rob, Mike, you might have had a little testimonial on there at one point. Cameron, you had a little testimonial at one point. And also, it was, for me, it was like, oh, I want these different perspectives. Like, you know, Cameron does a lot of industrial work. You know, Rob does a lot of lifestyle. So I want to show, like, oh, I can work on these types of sets. I can work on those types of sets. But it was just about kind of separating the emails a little bit, eliminating that second step of people having to, like, ask around for you know, reviews or whatever, and they could just say, oh, he's worked with him, here's what he had to say. Okay. And that kind of kept developing, as far as, you know, oh, I developed my portfolio site, you know, shoot and test with all this gear that I have and have subsidized for myself. And also working on the photo assisting, you know, brand or website, because again, it's like, okay, this is my business. What's the next thing that's going to just increase my day rate, increase my revenue? And I was going on tangents here. What do we got next? So just yeah, building the kind of separate brands. Um, so I rebranded my assisting, or for a while I was, assisting, I was promoting myself an assistant, and then it started to slowly be more assistant and digital tech. And then slowly over the years, eventually it was digital tech and assistant. So it finally like kind of switched, because, you don't want to oversell yourself, as far as you don't want to get into trouble on set with like just over representing yourself. So it's just that gradual rise of kind of services offered, and the equipment, being able to use all that gear to shoot and work on my portfolio. Oh, that's what I was going to talk about. Being on set and networking with the different departments, feeds back into your own shooting. Like, one, if you get a job, you're going to know who you can call for makeup, hair, location scouts. You're already going to have those contacts. So there's no really guessing as far as like, oh, do I know such and such to pull this off? No, I already have a list of everybody in the market, and beyond, because you have those traveling photographers that you're working with. So that's going to help you deal with your own shoots, and then also working on your portfolio. The same way that the photographer is going to, besides paying you, give you some, teach you and have that trade of, labor for the information for like working on his test shoots. You can trade with other departments. You can meet the assistant makeup artist. You can meet the assistant wardrobe stylist. Like, oh, you want to work on your portfolio? What do you want in your book? Like, let's do a test. You can share those costs with people, and you can just really elevate your own portfolio work. Working with hair and makeup, working with models, working with art department. That's really gonna help you build those connections for when you're shooting paid work, and help you build those connections to shoot unpaid work. It'll help in both ways. And then yeah, kept kind of just doing my thing, as far as trying to be more and more people's first, trying to work with expand my marketing, as far as in the beginning it was cold calling local people. It was eventually cold calling or cold emailing more national photographers, because I knew people would travel in, following reps and who's on their roster, and oh, this guy does, or this person does all travel work, or they're on location. All the big commercial photographers are basically just on location. So it's like, maybe get in touch with their producer or their rep or something. I get hired by reps a lot. Not direct through the photographer. It might be through the producer or through their rep. Hey, are you available? So I would just broaden my outreach as far as who am I marketing to. And the kind of the same stuff applies to photography and building your agency lists, and casting that. I'm getting a lot of local jobs. Now I wouldn't get those national jobs. And so just building it out that way. And similar to those New York photographers coming down on the train, I kind of prided myself, because I wasn't in this top tier market. I wasn't in New York or LA. Being in DC, to really be able to work with someone for the first time and just like fit into their workflow, and just immediately kind of being that local person. Oh, Peter's in DC, he's the local, we can maybe we'll bring in their digital tech, but he can be our first there, or however. A lot of my clients, I had my recurring good local clientele that would hire me for everything. And then a lot of my business was just completely one-offs. They'd be here for a day, they'd be here for 2 days, and then you never see them again. But you work together, and hopefully everything goes well. So that was what I was trying to position myself as is just someone who could just, as a pro assistant, just jump in and, be a helpful part of their set. And eventually I separated the brands, leaving a little bit more. I started the teching and assisting and gear business became format capture. And that was, just to even have a little bit more separation for search engine optimization, to logos, to invoices, just having a different company, basically, from Peter Grow Photography to, the digital capture and more crew work, and building that brand out. And this is, in this industry, you kind of have lots of different hats. And for me, especially having kind of these different revenue streams and just always being freelance, I think it's important to kind of have your fingers in different pies and to be able to, you're going to jump around, whether like, photo assisting is going to involve some gaffing and electric and grip and camera op. I've done some DP stuff. I've, lit stuff with constant light, lit stuff with strobe. You help with art department. You jump around a lot. On this shoot, this was for the building. This was an architecture job. And someone had to move the cars. So I got to move the cars. I had to reposition this McLaren to be centered on that circle, which I was very happy about. So I didn't really get to drive them, but I got to turn them on and park them in this all glass room, which made the exhaust sound super awesome. But like I said, this is just a bunch of random BTS at this point. How are we on time, Mike?
Well, we've definitely exceeded our 30 minutes, but
We're cruising, yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I know you've got a few more images that you wanted to show, and we can certainly open up for questions as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was kind of like the gist of getting started, and some of the, photographer assistant relationships, and basically the rest of that story is it just all kept snowballing. I'm now based in Portland. I moved during the pandemic. Switching markets is its own challenge, but I took a lot of the things that I originally learned about cold calling, about working with people for the first time, to try and get a foothold in this market, get started in this market. Going back to testing, I wanted to hit the ground working as crew so I could meet all the makeup artists. Like I could get, a ton of days as an assistant meeting all these people way faster than like how I would, organically make connections if I was like shooting projects necessarily. And so using a lot of that cold calling stuff to try and get into this market. Now that I'm here, and just in the past couple of years, and with the pandemic, has changed the landscape a little bit of just workflows. I'm sure, as everyone knows, we're streaming shoots. Clients are remote. These days, I've been doing a lot more national digital teching work. It's pretty much all advertising for pharma, finance, on location. Lifestyle is pretty much my bread and butter. Making things look natural and airy and fun. And also light teching, which I did a little bit of my last couple years in DC, done a little bit of it out here. It's, I think, different markets and different people have different impressions of what it entails, but I kind of like to think of it as like on motion shoots, you have a gaffer that shows up with a truck and, just gets it done. They have some lights for different scenarios. And so for light teching, where I'm not in necessarily a photo assistant role. I'm not necessarily trying to organize your backpack of lenses, but actually, light the shoot, work with the art directors, work with the photographer to build a mood, look at reference shots, make gear orders, and then, make it happen. And that can, I find that digital teching, getting that first eye on picture, just leads to being able to kind of know what tweaks are going to come. And for a long time in my digital teching, because I had first eyes, I would be, even though I wasn't the first assistant, I was the tech, I would still be like, I got the first view, so I'm the first one to be like, oh, let's take that light down 2/3. Oh, let's do that. Let's bring up the fill. Oh, actually, let's switch this. And you're working with the art directors. Oh, do we like his tie there? And so that kind of led into like, oh, I don't have to necessarily be behind the computer. I can just light this. And some of my clients now are requesting stuff like that, where I'm just a light tech. And then being out on the West Coast now, like I said, doing a lot more national ad work, working in California, working on location, traveling with, capture packages, being able to work on location with battery power and all that kind of stuff. This was before the format capture, a little strobe package for some photographer. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I've gone through our initial allotted time. So yeah, if anyone has questions, I can look at the chat. Or I don't know, Mike, if we unmute people.
This was great, Peter. I think I mean, we can, if anybody does have any questions. I'm not sure if people can manually unmute themselves or not. But if you're not able to, feel free to put something in the chat there. And Peter, this was a great overview of how you created a really unique situation for yourself in being able to build your business as a photographer, and becoming like the go-to assistant, and really optimizing what you could offer on both sides of that. It's pretty amazing. Really,
Thanks.
really,
And
yeah.
yeah, I can kind of just, like I said, there's a random collection of BTS in no particular order, but I can just kind of cruise through some of this. This was, I got to work with lots of photographers that I've, known about for a while or aspire to. This was a job with Mark Seliger in DC. He came down with, a lot of you guys might follow him on Instagram, Brooks Digi, George Brooks. He was on that shoot. He is like one of the top techs in the nation. And so interacting, goes back to that networking and seeing the different roles. I met him a while ago when I was barely into digital teching, didn't really have much gear. Got to work with him, see him work with Mark Seliger on location. That was awesome, as far as like, oh man, this dude George is killing it. And now he's in LA. He's got a full warehouse full of amazing digital capture stuff. And this was, Mark was shooting, he was shooting he was shooting a phase, a D810 or 850, I think it was a 10 back then, and then two Pentax, or some, Rob could probably chime in. He was shooting some film. So back then he had a awesome first assistant who was also loading film. He had the awesome digital tech managing a couple of different cameras. This was a Polaroid from our lighting test. I think his first assistant took it, but I still remember thinking it was really cool. It's like, oh, Mark Seliger, this is a light test from Mark Seliger. I probably still have that somewhere, but there's, I'm sure, a million light tests of me floating around on old hard drives. That was a shoot for Christine Lagarde. She was president or chair of the IMF. We shot that at their headquarters in DC. There's the spread.
That's awesome. And we do have a few questions popping up in the chat here as well. Peter wanted to point out. So we'll start, and maybe these can kind of go together a little bit. Lord Chase is asking if you're happy in Portland, and then
I am.
yeah.
Yeah. Portland's great. It's if you, I rock climb a lot, so I just always want to live on the West Coast and be in the mountains. And so being here, as a city, it's big enough that I can work and have a job and have income, but it also has a lot of that other stuff, that balance that I'm looking for and somewhere to live. I can easily get out to the mountains. My commutes here are so much better than in DC. Even now I'm commuting, LA is a quick 2-hour plane ride. So a lot of work in California these days. Really enjoying the move. Changing markets is tough. I knew of a couple photographers who I assisted. This goes back to like, I forget if I mentioned it, assisting, in addition to the lighting, the equipment, that set time, the professional development that you can get from one-on-one chats with photographers on travel days, on pre-lights or first assistance, not about equipment, but about like, estimates, bidding, taxes, business structure. Oh, are you an LLC? Are you an S Corp? Hey, how do you write off this? Can you, tell me about this Section 179 tax deduction on your grip truck? That type of business development you can get from those photographer first assistant relationships. I was going to link that into, I assisted some photographers who moved across the country to work in DC. So I could reach out and be like, hey man, like you changed markets mid-career, you moved to LA or you moved here. And I had some of those relationships that I built assisting, and I could, tap into that and get that, very specific information of like, you've done this, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? And then Sam is asking,
Yeah, Sam Scott, what's the balance between your two businesses? Are you shooting more for yourself or working for others? And where do you want that balance to land in the future?
So 2019 was the most I ever shot. And 2020 rolls around. I'm like, this is going to be my year. I am crushing it. Like I'm billing. So, you make a lot more as a photographer than an assistant. I was pretty psyched. And then the pandemic happened and everything closed down. And then basically before everything, we're still not quite normal, but then I changed markets. So I'm not shooting a ton right now. I shot a couple projects right before I left DC, shot a couple projects since. But my bread and butter and all the bonuses of like, oh, you meet the network, you meet you see the town, you meet the rental studios. I knew that jumping into this market as a crew member would be important to establishing myself as a photographer here, meeting all the makeup artists, meeting the crew, all those things that I talked about early in my career in DC are also valid here. The pandemic fucked up a lot of mid-level shoots and small shoots. It just like eliminated. So as like a budding photographer in the pandemic was really tough. Whereas digital teching, those remote shoots, so in DC, I'd have like a monitor for client. Hey, do you ever want 2 monitors? Like, would you rent that? Nope. You want like an iPad? Nah. Like there was a cap of digital budget and no one requested anything more. And that was that. Once the pandemic came, people want 6 monitors. People want remote streams. Like digital tech budgets are big right now. And so that's all my assisting basically completely went away. But advertising, digital teching jobs with full kits stayed. So I kind of moved up a little bit and I'm working a lot less days, but projects are generally longer and they're a lot more money. So that's where I'm at kind of right now. I do want to shoot more. I want to light tech more. I really enjoy lighting. And Portland is there's a lot of there's a lot of studio work here. So in DC, it was mostly on location. There's still a lot of on location stuff in the summer and travel here, but I would love to get a space and keep building the rental business that way. I think it would be really rad to have a studio.
Cool. Hey, and John's got a really interesting question. I think this applies to digital teching as well. He says, other than being succinct, what do you use as a pitch to assist now when other photographers know you shoot too? Do you play up or play down that fact when you're trying to get assisting work?
So that was one reason why I separated the businesses. Or separated the branding, but that reason wasn't as big as some of the other ones, but it was definitely valid. Some photographers will say they want to see your work as a photographer, and that could maybe give them a sense of your experience level, or could give them a sense of your lighting ability. But most don't care that you shoot one way or another, whether you're a good photographer or a shit photographer. If I'm getting a connection and it's not through like a recommendation or someone vouching for me, and they do want to know a little bit of like what's your story, what's your vibe, what's your experience, I give them a client list, I tell them the types of stuff I work on, and I don't mention my photography at all. And that's not necessarily like oh, he's going to be intimidated, because they're generally not. Any good photographer is not going to be intimidated by an assistant, or like not like a good skill-wise photographer. I mean, just like a nice person won't be intimidated by assistant. The good photographers who you want to work with want you to eventually shoot for yourself, or you're just such a good assistant they want to keep you as an assistant to themselves, but they want you to be successful. The people who don't, the people who would get intimidated probably aren't gonna give you much work anyways, because they're that's just like a toxic attitude to have. I think. Thanks, Edgar. Joe, do I have a rep? How do I connect with? Oh, for shooting jobs, I do not have a rep. This goes back to just like one of those great things that you can learn about from assisting and having this kind of relationships with photographers. Reps can be kind of a mysterious thing to someone who's never had one. Or it could seem like the holy grail of like, oh, once I have a rep, like I've made it. I've had, luckily had lots of conversations with photographers who are ending long-term rep relationships, switching rep relationships, going from one to another, going from unrep to rep and back, having local reps, national reps. Oh, he's my European rep, here's my North American rep. So that's been like a really, that professional development of just like talking shop, having that relationship with whoever you first assist, like has been great as far as like getting a vibe on reps, how to kind of shop around with them, how to build contracts with them. Everything's negotiable. I do not have a rep right now. I do some marketing. I pay for some databases. I use, LinkedIn. I try to be pretty direct with like, I want this company and this person, this is the agency for it, this is the art director for it. And, I usually start with something like LinkedIn or Instagram, honestly, for networking. But a lot of them come from producers, mutual producers, mutual photographers who are too busy. That's like how a lot of me and my peers who are crew members get, decent shooting jobs without kind of having to wade through a lot of the shit shooting jobs, if that makes sense. But yeah, no rep currently.
Cool. And then we've got two more questions, and I think we'll wrap up here. Jeff is asking, do you see many assistants coming up in that more traditional way of working for great people and learning on the job? And Carlene is asking about when you hire a tech, what's the first question that you ask to determine if they're qualified or a good fit?
Um, do you see many assistants coming up? Um, kind of. Yeah, I think um, as digital, has obviously taken over, but it it makes just shooting and testing, the gear is cheaper. Um, I think it makes working on your portfolio and um, doing it and diving in shooting wise is easier than ever. At the same time, you see a lot of assistants getting into digital teching, just because most assistants are a photographer, and most photographers have a laptop to edit photos. Like most assistants own a laptop, and then you add a couple more things to that gear, and like you could do some bare bones tech jobs, or maybe you tech for someone who has all the gear and you don't have to rent any, so you can get into it that way as an assistant. Uh, as far as coming up, the tricky thing is you can't, even if you have this amazing first assistant photographer relationship, you can't pay bills off one photographer. You need lots of them. And so I don't know how much of that has changed. I think you probably could have gotten away with less clients maybe back in the day. I don't know. But yeah, I think everyone's just kind of, as freelancers, trying to get as many jobs as they can, as whatever roles they can, and just grow from there. And then Carlene, when I hire a tech, um, I'm pretty much going to go off recommendations. Um, if anyone's like on, you post a lot of photography stuff on Instagram, most of your followers are other photographers. Um, for me, who posts a ton of well, I have two accounts, but if I'm posting a ton of digital teching content, most of my followers are digital techs. Um, I I find crew through Instagram. I'll just send out a story. Hey, I need such and such in this city, or that's the best way I use for finding people. It helps to like know some people and just go straight to them of like, hey, you're in that state or you're in that town. Who do you work with? But I also just will throw out kind of a general one to followers, and people can share that. Um, and then like just seeing their gear will give you a pretty good idea of like um, maybe where they are. But it's basically just like, I don't know, as a digital tech myself, I don't need the tech to be like that slick, because like I know how it all works. So, and I'll a lot of times jump on and like work on it myself if I'm working with the digital tech. And it's the same if I'm teching for someone who I know is a tech or was a tech. They'll jump on the computer and just be like, hey, let me drive, and do their own color grading and whatever, and they know how to navigate stuff pretty easily. So um, basically it's just like, hey, do you know how to use Capture One? Yeah, cool. um, but because of that, I'm much more interested in hiring a good first than a good tech, because the tech can just work on my equipment. And that goes back into the other thing of like, how do I make those revenues a little bit higher? Well, they're going to be, I still bill the agency for a digital tech setup, but it's mine, which can help on those, maybe lower budget jobs where I'm not absolutely crushing it as on a creative fee, but I can make it back a little bit on equipment.
That's awesome, man. Hey, and Peter, I think with that we'll wrap up here. I know you've been very generous with your time, so, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I again just want to thank you for sharing all this information and telling us your whole story, man. This is It
I know
was
it's
a real treat.
kind of all over the place, but hopefully it was.
That's all right. I mean, you had a career so far that's seen it all, so it makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, all right. Well, on behalf of APA DC, I want to say thanks again, and I hope everybody can join us on the 14th. We'll have that financial planning for creatives, um, and yeah. And Peter Grill, thank you very much. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming. All right. Have a great day, everybody.